My sister-in-law tried to steal my husband after discovering she was adopted, but her parents disinherited her for looking at her brother that way. Edit for clarification. My sister-in-law is my husband's adoptive sister. She was taken in by the family when she was a child. They grew up as siblings, but a few years ago she found out she was adopted. That revelation seemed to change her completely, and she developed an inappropriate crush on my husband, one that turned obsessive while she was staying with us. I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to my husband, who's 34, for 5 years. We've been together for 8. My sister-in-law is 30 and recently went through a really bad breakup. According to her, her ex was controlling and emotionally abusive, although I've learned not to take what she says too seriously. When she first mentioned moving to our city, my husband suggested she stay with us temporarily until she found her own place. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I agreed, thinking it would only be for a couple of weeks. That was 2 months ago. The reasons she's still living with us this long are many, but none of them are reasonable. My sister-in-law kept making excuses about why she couldn't find an apartment. Everything was too expensive, or in a bad neighborhood, or missing something she wanted, all small details that anyone on a budget would just have to accept. You can't expect 2 bathrooms when you don't even have a job. I started to suspect she had no intention of moving out about a month after she arrived. I noticed changes in her behavior around my husband. She started dressing differently when he was home, low-cut tops, short shorts, the whole package. Then I noticed how she constantly needed his help with ridiculous things, setting up her phone, fixing her laptop, figuring out how to use the TV. And she's not stupid, at least not when it comes to technology. My husband didn't see anything wrong with it. When I mentioned that his sister seemed to be finding every excuse possible to get his attention, he told me I was overreacting. He said they were siblings, they'd known each other their whole lives, and that she could never think of him that way. Then came the bathroom incident. My husband was showering, and despite the closed door and the obvious sound of running water, my sister-in-law accidentally walked in. I was in the kitchen and heard her laughing, followed by an exaggerated "Oh my God, sorry." When she came out, her face was flushed and she had this little smirk that made my blood boil. When I asked what happened, she just said she hadn't realized he was in there. That night, after she went to her room, I confronted my husband. I told him I didn't like how his sister was behaving around him and that he needed to set boundaries. He got defensive, saying she was just affectionate and that they'd always been that way as siblings. That was an outright lie. I've been with him for 8 years and I've never seen them act like that before. The argument ended with him reluctantly agreeing to talk to her about respecting personal space, though I could tell he still thought I was exaggerating. A week later, I got my chance. My husband left his phone on the counter while taking out the trash. It was unlocked. I checked his messages with his sister and noticed the most recent conversations had been deleted. That struck me as odd, since he never deletes messages. I knew there were ways to recover deleted texts, so after a quick search, I found an app that could help. What I discovered made my stomach turn. My sister-in-law had been sending my husband inappropriate photos and suggestive messages, things like, "I've always wondered what it would be like to be with someone like you," and "Don't you ever think about what could have been if you'd met me first?" My husband's replies weren't as explicit, but he never drew a firm line either. Mostly things like, "You're crazy," or "You shouldn't say things like that." Not once did he tell her to stop or say it was inappropriate. When I confronted him about what I found, he got defensive again, saying he never encouraged her and was only trying to handle it without causing family drama. According to him, he deleted the messages because he didn't want me to see them and get angry. Too late for that. I ordered a small security camera and installed it in our living room at an angle that covered most of the shared spaces. The footage I captured over the next few days confirmed every one of my suspicions. When I wasn't home, my sister-in-law would walk around in just a towel after her shower, conveniently timed for when my husband was in the living room. She'd bend over unnecessarily in front of him, touch his arm or shoulder whenever she spoke to him, and in general acted like a lovesick teenager. The most damning recording came 2 days later. I was out shopping, and my husband was working from home. My sister-in-law approached him while he was sitting on the couch with his laptop. She sat beside him, chatted for a bit, then leaned in and tried to kiss him. To his credit, my husband immediately pushed her away and stood up. He looked angry, said something I couldn't quite make out on the audio, then grabbed his laptop and went straight to our bedroom, closing the door behind him. When I got home, he didn't mention a thing. That night, I showed him the recording of his sister trying to kiss him and asked why he hadn't told me. He looked ashamed and admitted that she had been coming on to him for weeks. He claimed he'd tried to handle it without causing a family rift, especially since she was vulnerable after her breakup. I called that excuse garbage. His loyalty should have been to me, his wife, not to a sister acting like a predator. The next morning, after my husband left for work, I showed my sister-in-law the footage I had gathered. Her face went from shock to anger to fake tears in seconds. When she realized crying wouldn't work, she dropped the act and admitted everything. She said she'd always been jealous of me and had felt something for my husband for years. According to her, he'd given her mixed signals and encouraged her since she moved in. I knew that was a lie. My husband might avoid confrontation and be too passive to shut her down firmly, but he wasn't encouraging her. I told her she had 48 hours to pack her things and get out of the house. She started crying again, saying she had nowhere to go and couldn't afford her own place yet. I didn't care. I called my in-laws that same day to let them know what was happening. They've always liked me, but my sister-in-law is the family's spoiled child. So I wasn't surprised when, at first, they defended her. They suggested maybe I was misunderstanding things, that something like that couldn't possibly happen between siblings. I emailed them some of the videos. 20 minutes later, my mother-in-law called back, apologizing profusely and saying she had no idea her daughter would ever do something like that. Still, they asked if we could handle it discreetly, to avoid embarrassing the family. I told them I wasn't interested in making a public scene, but I also wasn't going to let my sister-in-law stay in our house a single day longer than necessary. When my husband came home that night, I told him about my conversation with his parents and the ultimatum I had given his sister. He completely backed me up. He went to her room and told her she needed to leave immediately. She tried to manipulate him, crying and insisting that I was throwing her out on the street, but he didn't give in. The next day, my sister-in-law packed her things, throwing me death glares the entire time. As she was leaving, she turned to me and said, "This isn't over. I'm going to ruin your marriage anyway." I just shut the door in her face, better that way. The following weeks proved that kicking her out was only the beginning of our problems. She wasn't about to accept defeat easily, and she was willing to go to extremes to get what she wanted, even if it meant destroying her relationship with her entire family. About 2 weeks after she moved out, one night my mother-in-law called us in tears. Apparently, my sister-in-law had called her while drunk and poured her heart out, confessing that she had fallen in love with my husband and didn't think it was wrong, because, after all, she was adopted, and they didn't share blood. They weren't real siblings. At least with that, she had deliberately admitted that she'd tried to seduce him and break up our marriage. That call changed everything. My in-laws told us they had been sending her money every month to help with her expenses, but after hearing her confession, they decided to cut her off financially. A few days later, we got a frantic call from my sister-in-law. She was being evicted from her new apartment because she couldn't pay rent without her parents' support. She begged us to let her stay with us again, promising she'd learned her lesson and would respect our boundaries this time. My sister-in-law was so desperate that she accidentally admitted all her manipulative behavior, saying things like, "I know I shouldn't have tried to break what you two have. I was just jealous of what you share." I recorded the whole conversation, just in case. Needless to say, we refused to help her. My husband told her she'd made her choices and now had to live with the consequences. He suggested she reach out to friends or look for emergency housing options but made it clear that our home was no longer an option. The last straw came when I discovered that my sister-in-law had copied part of my personal financial information while she was staying with us. She had tried to open credit cards in my name, presumably to rack up debt and cause us problems. Luckily, the applications were flagged as suspicious and denied, but it was a huge wake-up call. We immediately froze our credit and filed reports with the proper agencies. When my in-laws learned about this last incident, they were horrified. They called a family meeting with extended relatives to discuss the situation. During that meeting, they publicly announced that they were disinheriting my sister-in-law and explained why. They shared the evidence we had gathered, the videos, the recorded phone call, and the attempted credit fraud, with relatives who had been sympathetic to her version of events. That's how her Alabama attempts, as some called them, became known to everyone. In the following weeks, we heard from several people that my sister-in-law's life had gone downhill fast. Without her parents' financial support, and with everyone knowing what she'd done with her own brother, she was struggling to find a place to stay. She also couldn't hold down a stable job. The last we heard, she was staying in cheap motels when she could afford them, and on random couches when she couldn't. I can't say for sure that everyone she's staying with knows about her behavior, though some people eventually found out it wasn't a good idea to let her stay. She apparently tried to seduce a coworker's boyfriend at one of her temporary stays and was kicked out for it. Honestly, I don't feel bad for her at all. It's not like she's some poor, helpless victim. She tried to seduce my husband, who, in case anyone forgot, happens to be her brother. I don't know why she thinks it's somehow okay just because she's adopted. The fact that she's known him her whole life and treated him like a brother makes it even more disgusting to me. Edit. I don't know when exactly she started having feelings for my husband, or whatever it is she feels for him. She found out she was adopted a few years ago, so I'd like to think that's when it began, and even that's bad enough. But if she'd felt that way before knowing she was adopted, then honestly, that's so much worse. Update 1. I thought that once my sister-in-law was out of my house, everything would go back to how it was before, that my husband and I could return to normal. But nothing is ever normal when it comes to my sister-in-law. I knew she was messed up for having feelings for her brother, but now I think she's even more unhinged than I thought. A few days after my last post, my husband and I were out of town for the weekend, visiting some friends who live a few hours away. We got a call from our neighbors asking if someone was supposed to be staying at our house to watch it. The obvious answer was no, we didn't need anyone since it was just a weekend trip. Our neighbor's security camera had captured my sister-in-law entering through the gate to the backyard. Then, when we checked another neighbor's camera to see what she'd done, we saw her trying to open the back door. When she couldn't, she tried to break a window. Once we saw the recordings from both cameras, we called the police. They arrested my sister-in-law for attempted breaking and entering. After a few hours, we drove home immediately and met with the officers. They asked us to make a statement and file a formal report, since as a family member, she might have been under the impression she had some kind of permission to be there. We told them absolutely not, she had no right to be in our home, not during our absence, and not ever. When questioned, she claimed she was only trying to recover some personal belongings she'd supposedly left behind when she moved out, something the police already knew about because we had told them. She said she really needed those things, but the police didn't buy her story. Even if she had belongings left behind, that didn't give her the right to break in. Worse, when asked what items she was supposedly retrieving, she couldn't even give a clear answer. Her description was vague and inconsistent. We also informed the police that my sister-in-law had stolen my personal financial information in the past. At the time, it hadn't been enough for a criminal charge, but now, with everything combined, breaking and entering, data theft, and harassment, it was a serious pattern of offenses. My sister-in-law was taken into custody with bail set, but she couldn't pay it. None of her relatives were willing to help her, not even her parents. In the end, she was released by a public defender since she had no prior criminal record, though now, thanks to this, she does. A restraining order was also issued, requiring her to stay a certain distance away from our home and from us personally. As for my in-laws, they finally removed her from their will officially. From what I know, no one in my husband's family is in contact with her anymore. Update 2. Hi, if you remember me, I'm the original poster whose sister-in-law, my husband's adopted sister, tried to pull a Sweet Home Alabama situation. Then she was cut off by her family and even arrested for trying to break into our home without permission. I was convinced that was the end of it. Even my in-laws were on my side and had disinherited her. For a while, we didn't hear anything about her. We just knew she had moved to another city and basically vanished. Everything was peaceful, until she came back into our lives. Or more precisely, into my husband's life. At this point, I should probably say my ex-husband, because we're now in the process of getting divorced. A few weeks ago, I saw a strange message on my husband's phone. The contact was saved under a different name, not exactly my sister, the mistress, but something just as suspicious. I started reading through it, and while the conversation itself wasn't outright incriminating, it was definitely odd. I could also tell that some messages had been deleted, and that there was more going on than I was seeing. I used the same recovery app again to check for deleted messages, and what I found made everything crystal clear: my husband was having an affair. There were messages about meeting up for sex, and declarations of love between them. And that alone would already be bad enough. But there was more. In those messages, he called her by the same affectionate nickname he always used for his sister, leaving no doubt about who his mystery woman really was. I know many of you in the earlier posts said it was strange that my husband never shut things down completely, but since he'd agreed to throw her out back then, and my investigation hadn't shown anything beyond that, I never suspected a thing. From what I've found, the messages only go back a few months, so I'm fairly sure this affair is recent, though maybe there had been temptation before. Either way, it doesn't matter now. Whether new or old, I'm divorcing him. Of course I asked him about it, and according to his version, it started recently. But it doesn't matter anymore. For anyone curious about how it supposedly began, he says she reached out some time ago to tell him she was living just 2 hours away, that she'd found a job and a permanent place to stay. At first, they were just catching up. But eventually, she came to visit, and after that, their messages grew more and more emotional, until, as we now know, they were fully reciprocated by my soon-to-be ex-husband. He'd drive to her city or she'd come here for their meetings. Some people don't think my sister-in-law's feelings for my husband are that bad, ignoring the fact that he's my husband. Their logic seems to be that since they're not biologically related, it isn't real incest. Maybe I'm the weird one here, but if I grew up my whole life with someone I called my brother and suddenly learned he was adopted, I still couldn't see him any other way, not even if I'd known from the start. It's just too disturbing. I sometimes wish Reddit comments came with little flags next to usernames showing where people live, because I'm pretty sure a lot of them would have the Alabama flag next to theirs. Just kidding, but seriously, it's strange how many people don't think this is that bad. Anyway, this has stirred up a new wave of family drama. Thankfully, none of it's directed at me, but it's drama nonetheless. My sister-in-law had already been completely cut off from the family, and now my husband has joined that very exclusive list of 2. Basically, they're the 2 sick people who can't keep their hands off their siblings. At this point, I almost wish he'd cheated with someone normal, a friend, an ex, a co-worker. At least then I wouldn't be the woman whose husband cheated on her with his sister. And yes, I already know the kind of comments I'll get: that's what you get for not leaving him sooner. You're not wrong, and I won't deny that I was a fool. But being the OP whose husband cheated with his sister isn't much worse than being the OP whose husband started officially dating his sister during the divorce. Because that's what's happening now. My husband is basically in a relationship with her. It's not just his family and mine who think it's disgusting, friends and acquaintances raise an eyebrow too. I think they're all just waiting for the divorce to be finalized so the 2 of them can make it official. I honestly don't know how a divorce decree could make any of this look better. His family is completely disgusted by the situation, and I'm just waiting for all of it to finally be over. If they want to explore the Alabama coast, that's their problem. They won't be the first or the last, just don't expect me to stick around to watch it. Edit. There isn't much to say about the confrontation I had with him when I found out. I had just enough patience to let him explain his version, even though it wouldn't change anything, and then I calmly told him to get out of the house. There was no point arguing. Just knowing the nature of what he'd done was punishment enough. He had nowhere to go, and he knew his parents wouldn't take him in. I told him the first thing I'd do was call his parents, and that's exactly what I did. I told him I didn't care where he slept, maybe he could stay at his sister's place. Normally, after a fight, going to a relative's house wouldn't be a big deal, but in his case, well, we all know what that means. I don't know where he slept that night, but I doubt he went far, because their relationship, out in the open this time, started only a few weeks later. Update 3. Today was interesting. I learned a lot about incest laws from the comments on my last post. People from all over were explaining whether it's a criminal offense in their area or not. From what I've learned, it varies by state and even by county. Well, where we live, it is punishable, not by long prison sentences like in some places, up to 10 years, but still with legal consequences. Both of them were fined $8,000 each. Here, it doesn't matter whether they're blood siblings, if there's a recognized fraternal bond, that's enough to count. Since this has been an ongoing situation, they received the appropriate penalty for it. My divorce actually played a part in that. My lawyer argued infidelity as the main cause, and specifically that the third party was his sister. That secured us a very favorable divorce settlement and this little bit of poetic justice in the form of a fine. And just to be clear, the $8,000 is per person, not combined, so together they'll be paying $16,000 in total. Even my lawyer was surprised. He's not a criminal attorney, so he didn't know the penal code perfectly, he just knew that using that as grounds for divorce would strengthen our case. But it ended up working as an indirect way of pressing charges, resulting in their fines. I don't really know what's become of them. Their family has completely cut them off, and whatever little contact I have left with that side of the family isn't about them. I'm sorry if this ruined their plans to make things official, but legally, there are still papers showing their siblings, both are still listed as children of my former in-laws. I've thought about asking a judge to legally remove them as my ex-in-laws' children, so they can do whatever they want. Honestly, I'm so tired of all of this that if they want to be happy together, fine, they can. I've already gotten all the karma I needed from the situation. Thankfully, in real life outside of Reddit, people do see what they did as disgusting, and they've been socially ostracized. Today I plan for this to be my final update on the matter. I'm not going to keep posting about it. If they somehow manage to have a happy ending, well, good for them. Not a Disney kind of happy ending, obviously, though, with Disney lately, who knows.